Chosen One narratives have an image problem. From all sides, there are some very serious and substantial criticisms. Philosophy suggests that a prophesied saviour determined from the start to succeed raises some serious questions about free will. General readers argue that the Chosen One has been done to death, and intersectional critics are generally concerned that Chosen Ones lead to saviour narratives and kind of privilege a great man understanding of history and culture, which does not always bear fruit as a worldview. But I suppose the most fundamental problem with this device is that one character in a work becomes almost inarguably the most important, even if that character is not the most compelling, interesting, or worthy of attention. This isn't even only true for the audience, but can also very often be true in the world itself. Sacrificing everything is okay, as long as the Chosen One, and usually their merry little band of misfits, survives. Part of this issue can be fixed by re-examining the nature and scope of prophecies in our world building. If prophecies can and do fail, then a Chosen One loses that specialness fairly quickly. If you want to hear some thoughts on how to make prophecy in general more interesting, I have another video on that subject, but today I want to engage with the Chosen One, using history, myths, and a little bit of creativity to make this trope interesting again. But before we get into disentangling the web of Chosen Ones, I'd like to tell you about this video's sponsor, Erin Chronicles Exordium, Origins of Mythos. If, like me, myths, legends, and our most ancient of epic tales are a huge inspiration for your TTRPG games, then this book is for you. After a massively successful Kickstarter campaign, I'm here to tell you that right now is your last chance to pre-order with their late pledges. This book is filled with creative mythic archetypes, from your hero to your nemesis, monsters, and grand epic legacies for your characters to follow. From the Celtic Aes to the classical prophet, myth and legends are entwined with every part of this over 250-page book, replete with beautiful custom art. Not only does Exordium Origins of Mythos have many awesome stat blocks, its epic legacy system is a potent storytelling tool for making your game feel like those legends of old. Pre-order Exordium Origins of Mythos right now at the link in the description. You will not regret it. To get us started, I'd like to pose a question. How do we choose a Chosen One? I've already mentioned prophecy, but really, in worlds with often many gods and divine actors, we should see Chosen Ones fairly regularly. Case in point, Greek mythology, from Perseus to Theseus, Heracles to Achilles. Each of these heroes gets chosen by the gods and destiny itself to fulfill a grand role, the only one given certain special gifts and the only one who could possibly triumph in their grand quest. It's a tried and true formula. But let's take Achilles as an example. He's granted quite literal plot armor with a minor fatal flaw that will help us later, is the greatest and most handsomest warrior in the entire Trojan War, loses his best friend to the cruelty of fate, and fulfills his heroic destiny by getting revenge on the greatest Trojan warrior before his minor flaw is tragically exploited and the super special one dies, as foretold in that same Trojan War. Critically, though, the Iliad is not just Achilles' tale, and he's not the only chosen hero making his way through this same mythic odyssey. From Paris to Odysseus, many others claim divine favour, arguably chosen as major players by fate itself. This is an excellent jumping off point for how to see fantasy chosen ones. This is an excellent jumping off point. You see, in fantasy there are often many extant gods. Oftentimes they're in conflict or bickering or have some grander drama playing out between them, much like the Greek gods. In Greek myth, often these chosen ones find conflict breaking out between themselves as proxy warriors for these great gods' whims. And so that central question of whether prophecy is nice and accurate or not doesn't really matter, as long as those prophecies don't say, "He will successfully take the city of Troy and live happily ever after," or worse, "She will destroy the sole threat to all that is good, and then we can kind of call it a day." Prophecies are muddy. Heroes and chosen ones can and should die. And the whole thing is potentially, if you go down this route, a messy proxy war anyway. But that's certainly just one way to do chosen ones. In the Greek world, chosen ones are often selected because of their connections, often familial, to the gods, and they are inexorably tied to fate. But what about in other historic human worldviews? When we think of Christian and Jewish chosen ones, our minds may immediately go to Jesus or Moses or even Joseph Smith, depending on denomination or inclination. But in Christian and Jewish faith, we often see claims that thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or millions at a time are chosen ones. This is another fascinating angle that we can interrogate further and perhaps import into our fantasy worlds, a chosen people as opposed to a chosen person. Now, it must be said that in many real-world contexts, claims of a chosen people are often ethnocentric and used to fuel real hatred or repression. Although these things are classically interesting and fertile ground to build a world teetering on change or conflict in fantasy. And such themes can be explored very effectively and even sensitively in the fantasy genre. Chosen people are often decreed as such historically by the revelations of a god, usually one who represents a monotheistic faith expression in conflict or contention with its less monotheistic neighbours. Following this supreme god often confers that god's special protection and justifies oppression or indeed resistance against those whose gods are weaker or less real. This aspect doesn't work amazingly in fantasy, as the gods are often more provable or imminent, but it is also true that elven societies often echo many of these traits in traditional fantasy media, even down to having the oldest or the wisest gods and being blessed physically by the gods above all others. A chosen people, indeed. Despite the challenges in making a traditionally monotheistic chosen god shepherding their chosen people work in fantasy, I could see the people serving either a supreme or overlord type deity, or people who are protected by a personal, species-wide, species-specific creator god, or at least having those narratives as firm bedrocks for their civilization or species or group. Perhaps one of the best examples of this actually comes from the Drow in Dungeons & Dragons, who are often just coded as simple evil monsters. It is undeniably true, though, that their creator deity is one of the more potent amongst those deities within the Underdark, and is certainly one of the most active. To the drow, who can be transformed into monstrosities at the whims of Lolth, they are certainly her chosen people, and their wars, their enslavements, and their expansion is all in service of that fact. But it is true that even the chosen people angle is often one note and overdone. This is largely because the chosen people are often chosen to fight and rule over others. But what about if the chosen peoples were selected for something else? Let's look to the Maasai. Their god, named for the rain, is ambiguous in many cases and has two different coloured aspects, red and black. But a key feature of traditional Maasai faith is that this god chose the Maasai as a chosen people. Chosen for what? To be the custodians and herders of all cattle. Thus, any cattle claimed by another tribe or a landowner are considered a stolen aspect of their birthright and are theoretically fair game to be reclaimed for the Maasai. This leads to a culture that values herding and the protection of livestock very highly indeed, to such an extent that lions are historically a noble kill in Maasai culture. They are a threat, a serious one, to their cows. This type of thing, a god who determines a path for their chosen people that does not end in fire and war, is a novel approach that fantasy should take much more seriously. Either a chosen people or a chosen one selected to be the guardian, protector or vestige of a certain aspect of the world, especially in its larger cultural form as chosen people. This is not explored often enough. So often our chosen people seem chosen for simple domination and war. This is not to say that there aren't fantasy stories where the chosen one is chosen not to save the world, but to guard or act for a force within the world. Despite its eventual conclusion, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is a wonderful example of this. Aang is chosen not specifically for some great war to come, but because of an innate ability to master and claim control over the four elements. A task at which he has a higher level of natural aptitude than anyone else in the world. In fact, he's the only one who can manage it in his time. You see, he's the contemporary incarnation of the aforementioned Avatar. Incarnation, and especially reincarnation, are slightly underrepresented in the fantasy landscape, especially considering they form the core of many world faiths, specifically in the way that authority can be passed down generationally. Aang's journey, specifically his selection as the Avatar, is a clear reference to tests common in selecting a new Dalai Lama when the last one passes away. He is chosen by virtue of selecting the correct relics, a common test in the real world for young boys of the proper age to be direct reincarnations of the Tibetan Buddhist leader. Less referentially, but still related, we also see in Avatar the passing of authority along a chain of the chosen, much like with the Sikh gurus. Now, the 10 human gurus and the Guru Granth Sahib all claim an unbroken line of succession, each appointed to its authority by the prior guru. Specifically though, they are not regarded as reincarnations per se, but as inheritors of a divine light of religious authority. Most fascinating to me in this whole process is the fact that the said authority is passed by the 10th guru into the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the Sikh scriptural body of work. Not only is this a brilliant and fascinating example of the Weberian routinization of charisma really does deserve its own video at some point in the future, but it also demonstrates that Reincarnation or selected formal succession aren't the only ways to transfer a chosen status. Perhaps we could explore the idea of a chosen one being a spiritual successor that can be placed within even objects or words, instead of simply as just another way to do inheritance or succession in people. I just know that there's probably a few anime out there where the chosen one is a sentient toaster, but in general, the idea of divine authority being invested in non-humans is fertile ground indeed. Not least considering all of the mythic and legendary animals, beasts and monsters contained within fantasy worlds, many of which are created or chosen by the gods in some other way. Omens are also a big deal in chosen one succession, historically. Omens are so much more versatile than prophecies in storytelling, yet they tend to get used less, largely because an omen interpretation system is unnecessarily complex extra world building to say that a guy is in some way special. Guru Nanak, the first Sikh guru, Siddhartha Gautama, who would later become the Buddha, and Muhammad, the prophet, all are attributed and associated with significant omens surrounding their births. Omens are excellent because their interpretation, observation, and recording are all ancient art forms, and symbols like white elephants appearing in a mother's dreams and certain gates across the world shuddering are powerful symbols onto which meaning can be attached. There can be little doubt, even among the least receptive to my arguments, that Muhammad and Jesus firmly, at least, count as chosen ones in their respective faiths. And the omens which are reported to accompany the births of both are clear signifiers of this to contemporary religiously active and questioning folks. Even without any prophetic expectation, both of these births would have been momentous to witness, even from afar, if all of these reports of strange omens and occurrences are to be believed. The point is, you don't really need to get involved in the meta-linguistic act of writing prophecy into your work or world when omens can serve the same purpose, but with a little less clarity, a little more fuzziness. Omens give room for more varied interpretations and, indeed, for free will. After all, prophecy, if always reliable, creates that same old problem of why the chosen one needs to even bother. Omens can mark a person as special or chosen without engaging in that murky discourse, or alienating or boring your audience by either spoiling the ending of your own story or having to use clever wordplay and trick your audience just that right amount for it to be satisfying. Even if myriad omens set a person up to be a powerful, significant player, a chosen one, there's no telling, really, exactly where you will end up. At the right hand of evil, slaying some great tyrant? Or will this special chosen person be the one to invent the industrial loom? To sum up, chosen ones are all over our history, myth, and media. Yet modern media only really explores a few small subsets of this type of story. In my opinion, the least interesting parts. Omens instead of prophecies, chosen peoples or groups, and having multiple chosen ones present to represent distinctive and disparate choosers in your world are all wonderful ideas that tangle those threads of fate just enough to be unexpected. And if you want to use a chosen one in your TTRPG games even, which is usually a really frowned upon practice within the collaborative multiplayer games, you can. Or even use multiple and use these tips from this video to avoid many of those really common table ruining pitfalls. Also, Exordium Origins of Mythos has an epic legacy system which allows for the fulfillment of this exact sort of mythic fantasy while keeping balance and table cohesion at the forefront. Again, check out your last chance to pre-order using the link in the description. That's all I have time for today. Let me know what other topics I should be covering in the future in this vein, or in this sort of mini series I suppose it's spiraling out to be. But otherwise, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.